The worst on-the-job fiasco any disc jockey was ever involved in happened to Alan Freed, the godfather of rock and roll. He'd promoted a big concert in the Cleveland Arena, and it was a sellout. But when counterfeit tickets brought 22,000 people intending to sit in just 12,000 seats, Alan Freed had to run for his life. That story is coming up.
The hits from coast to coast. American Top 40.
This is Casey Kasem on American Top 40 in Hollywood. Now, my story about Alan Freed and his Cleveland Arena fiasco. Many of you may recognize Freed as the godfather of rock and roll, the first white disc jockey in a major market to feature rhythm and blues on a pop station. That was back in the early 50s, on the eve of the rock and roll era. Now, Alan Freed was a disc jockey working at WJW in Cleveland. In March of 1952, he promoted an event at the Cleveland Arena. It was a sellout, and a capacity crowd of 12,000 fans were expected to show up. But that wasn't counting the 10,000 extra counterfeit tickets some crooks had printed up and sold to unsuspecting fans. Well, Saturday night came, and 22,000 people tried to claim their space in an arena that couldn't hold more than 12,000. And the riot that followed was really terrible. The police had to call in reinforcements, and the fire department turned the high-pressure hoses on the rioters. And on the bandstand, right in the middle of these thousands of angry people, stood the one man everybody held responsible for the mess, Alan Freed. Now, I was told some of the details of this story by Alan's engineer who was there that night and who was my engineer several years later when I worked in Cleveland. He said that when the oversized crowd began to press against the bandstand, the security officers dropped a rope from the announcer's booth above the arena floor and hoisted Alan up to safety. Well, for the next 2 days, while the chief of police, the mayor, and the fire chief were all screaming for his head, Alan Freed was nowhere to be found. And then, Monday night at 7 o'clock, he walked into his studio at WJW unannounced to host his regular program. For 30 minutes, he just talked, explaining about the counterfeit tickets and expressing his deep regrets for the confusion and his sympathies for the people who were injured. And I guess Freed must have been very, very convincing, because the next morning, all the charges brought against him were dropped. And 2 months later, the city of Cleveland rented him the arena for another event that went off without a hitch. And that's the story of the Cleveland Arena fiasco and pioneer DJ Alan Freed, part of the legend of rock and roll.
The hits from